Welcome to The Space for It with Makayla and Jacob. We are two therapists working to navigate making space for what comes up as part of the human experience. So today, we have kind of an interesting topic. Jacob, do you want to introduce our topic for the day?
Sure. Today we are going to talk about what it is like to navigate the space of providing therapy, of being a therapist as a human who is imperfect, has inconsistencies, struggles with things, is a very real person, just like everyone else, um, in the midst of the pressures that can show up to be perfect, to have it all together, to have all your ducks in a row, however you want to say it, like to essentially be not human. And how do you navigate that space, and how do you support people well in the midst of stressors and chaos and all of it? Because as humans, life can be kind of messy.
Definitely. And I think part of it we wanted to explore that as therapists. And then part of it as people. Like,
Mm.
how do all of us as humans show up in our work when we feel pressured to be perfect? And then life happens and we're sick or we're going through something with our family. So, yeah, as therapists, but also as people.
One of the things I love about this topic, and I feel like this topic has become more and more talked about probably in the last decade or two because of social media, but one of the things I love about it is that it can be very bonding to actually let people into our imperfection. Because so much of what we see when we look around us, we see people who appear to have it all together. And it's not just on social media. Like on social media, obviously, we post the highlight reels. And so we post things that look finished, things that look polished. But even even outside of that, like you drive around and you see people like having nice things, driving nice cars, having big houses, just from all intents and purposes looking like it's all together, it's all good.
Mm.
And when we look at our own lives, like I invariably look at my life, I have 4 kids, everything is chaos, our house is always messy, and I'm like, it's not polished at all.
Well, and I'm interested because you brought up social media partially as being connective, but then also partially as
Mm.
impacting that sense of perfection or that polished. So I'd say a little more about social media and how it plays into this.
Have you heard of the 17 diaper mom?
No.
This was something that just happened on social media, like in the last 2 or 3 weeks. But there was a mom who has a newborn, and incidentally, I never actually saw the video. I just saw controversy about it. But she posted a video where either she showed or just talked about the fact that like there's a pile of 17 used diapers that were just not thrown away yet in the room. And people started going after her and being like, "You're a terrible mom, like how could you not throw those away?" Or like, where's the dad in all this? Like, where is your support person who could also throw those away? And really, really coming for her. And what's interesting about that is that as a parent, like I can guarantee if we go in my house right now, I bet we could find 10 or 15 diapers not in trash cans that should be in trash cans. But also, there's so much judgment that comes from actually showing an unpolished life. There's obviously like the good side of social media where people can see things that are not polished and be like, "Oh good, I'm not the only one." But then there's the judgment piece. There's the, well, if I show something that's not polished, how will people respond? Will I be criticized or attacked for it? And the answer is
Mm.
probably yes. But also, like it's complicated, and I lost where the initial question started. I got excited.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just like, yeah, how social media can be a tool that connects us and is beneficial by being able to say, it doesn't always look this way. Um, and then how on the other side it can be a source of judgment, of criticism, of shame when we do show up in not that polished way. So I can see where you're going with that. Yeah.
When COVID happened, so like 4 years ago, which is crazy, my wife and I started like trying to do family vlogging.
Mm.
And that was an experience. Like the the amount of work that takes, but also the amount of pressure to basically have life appear like, okay, we're going to do this fun activity and we're going to film it and everybody's going to have fun. And then
Mm.
things start being not fun. And then, like, at that point, we had two kids and they were very little, and kids don't cooperate with anything. And then they're not cooperating and we're getting annoyed because it's like, no, this is supposed to look like this. And it
Mm.
was a really interesting experience to try and balance. Like, we always tried to make it so that the filming was not like super invasive, and we would always try and be like, no, this should be genuine. We don't want to like force our kids to smile or anything, but still there was always pressure to have it appear a certain way, to have it go a certain
Mm.
way. Like, I have the expectation of how I want this to look in a post, and it needs to be
Yeah.
fun and it needs to be engaging,
Hmm.
and that makes it so that it's not real life really quickly.
And as you say that, what comes to mind for me is people's hesitancy to post anything that isn't polished, that isn't as real or doesn't appear that perfect way. And in that, like trying to control or think about all the ways that other people could perceive it. There's
Mhm.
so much mental energy that goes into that. I do that. My clients do that. Like thinking about what other people are going to think of this action or that part of my life or XYZ. And it does seem in some ways um, very amplified when we have a social platform that
Mhm.
so many people can see.
Another piece to this that I think is really interesting is that so many of the larger influencers, like, they're often the ones that people look at and are like, well, your life is just so perfect and so fun. And what's unique is that when they try and show the unpolished, they're like, look at my house, it's kind of messy right now. It's like, well, yeah, but it's also like a $1.5 million house. And
Mm.
so your messy still looks nicer than most of what our average people would say would be our clean.
Mm.
And I think that that's such a unique challenge, because if you think about the fact that we are all human, we have all of these like commonalities in within our experience, even though a lot of the specific details of what our lives look like are different.
Mm.
It becomes this weird thing where we are always comparing and judging and looking at things, and even in an attempt to do a good thing, it can still come across in a totally negative way, unrelatable way. Yeah.
Well, and I think that just points to the issue, I guess, with any of us taking one sliver of someone's
Mm.
life and saying like expanding that out to what their life actually looks like. Like in any point in time, um, there's so much context that adds to that. I
Mhm.
know when I have someone cut me off in traffic, like it doesn't feel good,
Mhm.
and I could call that person an asshole. But I wonder too if it's valuable or useful for us to buy into the judging of our mind and like really label someone based on a moment, or
Mm.
again a sliver of that part of their life.
Like, if you think about how, as humans, we live lives from our own perspectives, and so when you do something that impacts me, I think about me. I think about the impact it had on me very much more quickly than I think about you and what's going on with you. In that, here's a great example. Earlier this week, my wife had like a postpartum appointment at her doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and she had the first part of the appointment, and then there's the whole like, okay, now get ready, just sit there and wait, and the doctor will be with you shortly.
Mm-hmm.
And usually that's like, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of waiting. And so she's sitting there waiting, and 5 minutes goes by, and then 10 minutes goes by, and then 20 minutes goes by, and then 30 minutes goes
Yeah.
by, and then 40 minutes goes by, and she's just sitting there in the room like, thought I'd be home by now.
Yeah.
And I'm at home like taking care of our two little boys, and like it's fine. Like, I'm very competent and capable to do that. But it's also like, it's nice when we're both home to do that.
Yeah.
And after I think it was like 50 minutes, like 50, a nurse came in and said, like, sorry that the doctor hasn't come in here yet. The person she was with before you, like, they just found out she miscarried.
Mm.
And there's this total shift from like, I'm so annoyed to, oh,
Yeah.
like that inconvenient time for me represents a huge loss for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And normally we don't think about that first. We just think, oh, well, this obnoxious doctor is taking forever.
Thinking on my own life, as you say that, like it takes, and thinking about just our general like natural tendencies, our brain's tendencies to judge or to think solely about ourselves, or for the most part, like have more of a spotlight. Um, it takes a lot more intention and more effort to focus our mind in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And to, it's a practice to start doing that. Um, and I'm curious, like, is that something you practice, or how do you practice that for yourself?
I love to think about it as kind of the contrast between criticism and curiosity.
Mm.
Because criticism always says, there's a problem, you're the problem. And curiosity says, oh, this is interesting, tell me more.
Mm.
And I am not by any means perfect at that. But I'm always working really hard to remind myself, particularly when I can catch myself being judgmental or critical, to remind myself that there's probably more to the story. There's something
Mm.
here that I'm missing, and I should try and explore it and figure out what it is. Because odds are, to whatever, like whoever is doing whatever, it makes sense.
Mm.
Like, it makes sense to them. There's a reason. It's probably rational and justified given the context.
Mm.
And I find that the more I'm able to lean into that, the more I'm able to lean into curiosity, the easier it is to hold space for multiple realities, not just mine.
And what I hear in that too is not necessarily stopping your brain from judging, but noticing when it's judging and pausing from like having that be the only thought, and allowing some space for other thoughts, a little bit of wonder or curiosity, or yeah, just those different realities to be present or possible. I wonder how that feels different from when your mind just judges and then goes down that rabbit hole. Um, how does that feel different in your body or mentally than when you hold that space and pause?
That's a great question. And for me, it's very softening.
Mm.
Because when I'm judging and I'm critical, there's that tension, and I can feel the tightness.
Mm-hmm.
And then realizing or recognizing, oh, this is what I'm doing, and this is misplaced.
Mm-hmm.
I can often even feel like I feel things loosen. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, take a deep breath, slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's dying. It's not a rush. Whatever it is, like, relax.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to flip the question on you. Like, is this something that you work on, or how do you do it?
Thank you for asking. And I wanted to just end by saying, like, that softening sounds way more pleasant. Like, as you said it, I noticed my own muscles kind of like take a deep breath and relax a little. And it feels better to be in that space. Thinking about my own journey a little bit with this, I come from kind of people pleasing growing up and learning how to navigate other people's moods and wanting people to be happy, wanting to have pleasant interactions or help people or support people. It's probably why I'm a counselor. And luckily, I do that in a different way now. So I also get to be part of the caring for myself too. But one of the things that I think that allowed me as a skill was to be really aware or considerate of others, which is a skill in some ways, and in some ways a detriment because of the way that I would only be able to look through my lens. Growing up, we don't, until we learn to take other perspectives, we don't
Mhm.
just initially have that skill. And so I always I remember having these thoughts of like, why don't other people do this too? Like, why aren't other
Mhm.
people as considerate, or why aren't they thinking about it this way? And I could get caught in the judgments and in the frustration and the expectations that I had for other people. And part of it was because I was working so hard to do these things that I was like, I'm showing you how to do this. Why aren't you following suit? Like,
Mhm.
I'm trying to lead here. And that was subtle as a kid, but I can feel it um, as that was an intention too, like hoping people would do the same. So as I journeyed through college and became more and more stressed out by other people not doing the same and me not understanding, there was a lot of mental struggle and conflict inside. Um, my friend invited me, offered or suggested lightly, like maybe you should talk to someone and see, like, all
Mhm.
this stress seems to be really heavy and really
Mhm.
hard to hold. And I was so offended. I think I brought that up on the
Yeah.
podcast before.
Yeah.
And it's so funny to me now because it's like it just is a natural reaction sometimes when we
Mhm.
are in that space and we don't feel like we're handling it well, but we feel like we should be, or but yeah, so I eventually, I don't even know what changed, but I did make an appointment. I went and saw someone and had them listen. And it started this whole other space of them being able to reflect, like, where my mind was doing those things, where it was judging or expecting, and how that was for me, how that was creating this experience in the world of anger and frustration, and tenseness in my body and mind. Um, and that there was a possibility to do that differently.
Mhm.
So that was probably my junior or senior year in college that happened. And ever since then, um, slowly, not all at once by any means, but starting to try different ways of looking at people, different ways of different practices. And I really learned, like, my mind also really loves, I think most of ours do, to think that there's like something, there's an it that will be, that'll be it, that will fix it. And learning that really it's more of like, I can practice judging. And when we don't choose to practice anything else, generally that's what our mind does. It's really good
Mhm.
at that. Um, so I can choose to do that. Or, like you were saying, with a pause, I can notice that, I can observe that, and then I can choose something else. And so that
Mhm.
for me was that really powerful. Like, I can choose something else. So it's been mindfulness, loving kindness meditations, compassion practices. One of my favorite ones, honestly, though, is impersonality,
Mm.
which is basically trying to take the perspective of like, if this has nothing to do with me,
Mhm. Oh yeah.
and just kind of seeing like, I wonder, again, bringing that curiosity, I wonder what in that person's life is going on for them, like what their experiences have been like, um, what they are today, and what it feels like for them. And even just feeling a sense of like, maybe they feel this tenseness that I used to feel and that I still
Mhm.
feel. I mean, I'm human, it happens for sure. And that even is hard. Can I just connect to that? Like when people
Mhm.
are rushing around and feel like they have to rush. Um, that's not fun. Like it doesn't feel good to be in a
Yeah.
rush. So I don't know. That's a lot of words.
I I love like I loved like hearing you kind of walk through that process from the like I was raised more as this people pleaser, like that was how my environment impacted me. But then also hearing almost the judgment that comes from that, where you see other people and it's like, well, how come you took the last cookie? You're not supposed to take the last cookie. You're supposed to think about other people who might also want that.
Mhm.
And it's funny how that can turn into something so negative so easily. But also
Yeah.
then like the shift of working towards recognizing like that more impersonal piece of like, okay, this is probably about you and not about me. So let's be curious there.
Mhm.
And one of the big conversations that also is happening societally right now is the idea of weaponizing therapy speak.
Mm.
And I think that's somewhere that it can be really weaponized if we're not careful.
Mm.
Because if I look at everything and I'm like, oh, that's about you, not about me, and I never check myself to make sure, like, did I do something that might be influencing you treating me this way or you doing
Mm.
this thing,
Yeah.
then we can totally miss it and be like, well, almost like the narcissist behavior of like, that's all you. You're just being a
Mm.
terrible person.
Yeah.
And so holding the balance of absolutely, like, I'm going to make the assumption that probably what you're doing, if it's impacting me negatively, wasn't personal. But I am also going to check or try and look in a mirror for a second and be like, did I do something?
I so appreciate that because sometimes when I come from my lens of seeing it more from a personal growth standpoint or more from a compassionate standpoint, I don't take those other perspectives that people could weaponize that.
Mhm.
So I super appreciate you bringing that up. And I also, when you were saying like the other person took the last cookie, and like how in it from that perspective it could be very like judgmental or negative. I also thought like it's also an opportunity for
Mm.
me to look at myself and be like, when you're saying like, wait, you're not supposed to, there's that rule that shows up, like, where
Mhm.
did that come from? Like, is that something that I just learned in my family, or is that a general rule, or is that a social rule, or like a cultural thing, or is that something that, yeah, was just for me? They didn't learn that apparently. And is that a bad thing? I don't think so. Maybe it's just something that I could open to and be like, huh, maybe I could take the last cookie sometimes and that would be okay. Like, I don't know.
The
It's just kind of interesting.
It's super interesting. And like, I was raised in a family where it went, I would say it went a little bit overboard on the always be thinking of others. So the
Mhm.
last cookie was always left on the plate.
Mhm.
And you don't take the last cookie because that's bad if you like, that's selfish if you do. That's not thinking of others. And not everyone is that way. Like, there are a lot of contexts where it's like people are rushing to grab that last cookie because like, oh,
Mhm.
there's only one, I better get that.
Mhm.
And yeah, like challenging what is the belief or the rule that I've been taught, and then asking, is that the letter of the law or is that the heart of the law?
Mhm.
Because if the letter of the law says, well, you never take the last thing, but the heart of the law is simply that we're actually demonstrating care and attention for others,
Mhm.
then it's not about the last cookie at all. It's about making sure, like, hey, did everybody get what they need? But also acknowledging you are also a somebody.
Mhm.
Like, you are just as important as everybody else, which means, like, you don't always need to be last. Kind of like what you were saying there. You can
Yeah.
take the last cookie sometimes.
And I love that so much because it gets back to that, what's the context?
Mm-hmm.
And it's and adapting to, it's not just the rule. In our mind,
Mm-hmm.
it loves rules. So I want to normalize that, like how human of us, that our mind is like, ooh, efficiency, let's do that. We have a rule, we know what to do, like black and white. It's part of the way our minds were built. We just love that. And can when we slow down and we can look at the context, we can get more into that intention or the heart of the law, like you say, rather than just the letter. And I think that is one of the ways we can soften a little
Mm-hmm.
bit to our imperfect humanity.
One of the things I love about being a therapist is the opportunity to get such an intimate window into so many lives.
Mm.
Like, therapists see the opposite of the highlight reel. Like,
Mhm.
we see the lowlights, we see the things that people would never want to post anywhere. And I think because we see so much of it, it makes it really easy to have the viewpoint that says, like, no, it's normal to be a mess. It's normal to be imperfect. And yet the flip side of that as a therapist is this pressure to be like, if you're going to trust me to sit with you, I need to have it together.
Mm.
I need to dress professionally. I need to show up professionally. I need to have all of my personal ducks in a row
Mm.
so that I can make space for you to be a mess. But within that, then I think there's this pressure on the client side, like there's the pressure to hide things because it's like, well, if I look up and I have you on a pedestal, I don't want you to see my full mess. Like I'll let you into a piece, but not everything. But also it's hard as a therapist at times because
Mm.
it can feel like in order to be trusted as a professional, I need to be something I'm not.
Part of me, again, our minds, I think, love this sometimes when we get to put ourselves on a pedestal, when we feel a little bit higher up, maybe a self-esteem boost or I don't know, something. We like to be seen in a certain way or perceived. And at the same time, it creates pressure.
Mm-hmm.
But not only for us, I think if we act like we're perfect and we let people think that we are perfect, like how realistic is that for that person to grow or move, or is it just impacting and maybe even amplifying that sense that like there is a right way to do it and I'm just not doing it, or there
Mm-hmm.
is a level like that I can be on, that other people can attain this sense of perfection and I'm just broken, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, so it's kind of interesting. I don't know that it serves anyone for us to do that
Mm.
to a full degree. So where is that line to show up? What, and I want to hear your thoughts, to show up imperfectly,
Mm.
yet also, I don't know, not so messy that we're like taking over session or like.
I think that's a hard line to draw because it's different with every client. Because there are absolutely clients that want you to be perfect. Like I can only trust you because you come across this way, which arguably is a great topic to work through in therapy. But also there are clients who like often one of the ways that I will self-disclose in sessions is allowing people to see glimpses of my very messy humanity. Like, hey, there are diapers laying around the house. I've been up since 3:50ish this morning because of screaming children. Like there are all of these pieces of my life that are chaos. And often I will let those out in moments where it's like, hey, like I hear the self-judgment that you're doing. And like we've explored that. We've walked through like what's behind that, where does it come from? And still there's this element of like, well, I just don't see anybody else is struggling the way that I do. And that's often where I'll let out a piece and be like, hey, guess what my life is like.
Yeah.
And I mean, the other thing is, I don't know that I've ever shared a piece of my mess in a session and not had the person I shared it with be like, wow, thank you for sharing that. Like that helps me feel so much less alone in it.
Yeah.
And that, like, I love that. That to me makes it so worth sharing. It's like, yeah, that's the point. Like, you're not alone. This experience of being human, where we feel like we're all very unique and we're the only ones experiencing what we're experiencing, we're not. So much of what we experience is actually fairly universal and relatable.
And I love that too, because we can model that acceptance that this image our mind gives us isn't always helpful or accurate or something we need to compare ourselves to. There's also this space for us to notice that our mind does that and to say, you know, this is what is. This is what my life is like at this moment in time. And maybe I can focus or bring some attention to some of the things that are going well, some of the things that I'm proud of, and some of the ways that it's chaos. Like, yeah.
You highlighted something there that's super important with this, and it's the idea of margin. Because at different points in life, we have different margin for things, and it's so easy to judge based on previously what our margin was, not what it is today. Like going back to diapers, since that's what's on my mind right now.
Yeah.
When we had our first kid, I hardly ever remember leaving diapers on the ground. Like occasionally, but not too often. And part of that was just that like we put diaper pails everywhere we would change diapers, and it was like you change the diaper there, it's literally like 2 inches, you just put it in.
Mhm.
But like second kid, more diapers got left around. Third kid, we would throw away the diapers once a week. Like
Mhm.
they would just pile up for a week. And now it's just like there are diapers just floating around that we changed him there. And that's where the diaper is because you pick up the baby and not the diaper. And just for the record, for anybody who's listening, the diapers, we do close them up. They're not sitting open, dirty on the floor. They are closed. But like, if I look at the margin that we had in our lives when we had our first kid, it made perfect sense that that was much more manageable. Versus now, it's like, no, there's so much going on all the time, and accepting that as having changed what we have margin for makes it a lot easier to also not judge ourselves for the way things are.
Mhm.
Like for the fact that our house looks very lived in pretty much all the time.
I appreciate that one of the ways that that languaging shows up, I guess I haven't heard it as margins, but I have heard it as like we do our best each day, and our best always looks different.
Mm-hmm.
There's today, what is our best? Like
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's way less than what it was yesterday. Something happened, we're sick, our partner is sick or injured, or we got in a fight. Like maybe our emotional capacity is reduced, our sleep
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. You know, there's so many contextual factors that we're not going to be able to show up the same way we did yesterday. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe today it's more. Maybe we slept better and we had a connecting experience with our partner or something. But it does change, and I wonder how how do we honor that in a
Mm-hmm.
world that seems to, and again, I think it's very human of us. We want consistency or routine or what we can expect to be similar. But how do we honor that
Mm.
imperfection or that change?
So often, the thing I go back to in conversation is self acceptance. Because if I accept, like, if I held up a pen and said, I believe that this pen is here, I believe this pen is real,
Mhm.
and you said, no, it's not, it doesn't matter. Like, what you think doesn't matter because I accept that it's real, I believe that it's there. And if we apply that to ourselves, like, if I accept what I'm capable of today, and I do what I'm capable of today, the judgment of others is insignificant to me. It's like, well, I did what I could. So there it is.
Mm.
And I think that's very hard to actually live sometimes. And I think it takes a lot of work to actually work towards acceptance that says I can do what I can't. I can do what I can, not what I think I should be able to.
Mm.
But to me, like that's a big part of this is allowing yourself to not have to be anything that you're not, to not have to be capable of anything that's not within your capability today.
Thinking from my experience with clients and with myself, where some days, like, how do I practice that?
Mm.
How do I can get the concept, it makes sense. Um, and then partially as a social being and thinking about like we do look for validation from others. We look for belonging or acceptance, or how do we get to a place that we can self-validate or self-accept? Or what is a practice like that? How do we start?
Do you have an answer to that question?
That's a good question. What comes up for me is an intentional practice, like taking
Mm.
time, making it a priority or something that I value to include myself in the care. And and part of that is stepping outside of, so maybe a first step is awareness. Awareness of the expectations I have for myself or that other people have for me, or of the rules that show up in my mind or the judgments. I think one of the things that really impacted me towards this end was thinking that I'm the only person who will be with
Mm.
me my entire life.
Mm.
From my first breath to my last, like I am the one that needs to learn how to take care of me, because anyone else, if I depend on anyone else, which I'm not saying depending on other people is bad. We need other people. We have to depend on them sometimes. But if I give all of that, like, to someone else, I don't know how helpful that is. One, because they're not in my body or my mind. They don't know what I need unless I know what I need. And they also too have their own needs and wants and things like that they are biased sometimes and maybe can't offer me what I need or want. So being able to consider taking care of myself as like a responsibility I have, that for me has made that valuing or that intentionality to practice some self-acceptance and have improved the relationship I have with my body, my human experience, this being more acceptable or possible. What do you think? I'm curious.
I hear such loving undertones in that. Like the idea of, well, this is me, this is who I am, this is who I'm gonna be living in this body as long as I'm living in it here. And so choosing to honor that and choosing to try and prioritize, okay, how do I care for this? How do I monitor what I need, what is within my capacity, and how do I actually like express that and act on it? I think that's great. And that's very different than the answer I was thinking. Because to me, the time that most of us will actually have to question this is when we run out of margin, when we reach the limit of our capacity, and then the options are either like go up in flames, judge ourselves very harshly, or try and figure out some way to cheat the system, or we can choose to say, yeah, I have recognized that I'm at the max of what I can do, and it doesn't work. And so I have to figure out a different way. And I think for me, like, that's how I end up getting there, because I'm like, I'm doing more than I can. I have to let some of this pressure go.
What came to mind for me there was a sense of like internalization versus externalization. In the sense of when we've created this world that is so busy and so demanding in a lot of ways of our time, our energy, our emotional capacity, of all sorts of things, our resources. And it seems like a lot of times, maybe because of a sense of wanting to be able to control things, that we internalize and say, like, something's wrong with me, that I don't fit into this, or that I can't keep up or always produce at this level or show up this way. And I think maybe even in that awareness or pause is like, what if, like, can I connect with myself? Like, am I truly doing what I can? And if I am, which I believe we all are, until we know different, I think we all are doing our best each day. And that looks very different for every person. But then we can look outside a little bit and saying, maybe it's not me exactly that's the problem, or at least part of it. So what is it about the way things are, the way my job works, or are there boundaries that I'm not setting that maybe I could, and maybe I'm afraid to, but I could, or a job I could take that would be different, that I could like show up maybe a little more imperfect, or could it, yeah. So just kind of being able to, and not just putting it out there and being like everyone else is the problem, but it is just kind of like, is it all us really? Or are there things, maybe us becoming more aware of that or allowing that possibility can help us start to think of, like, how do we change it? How do we change it so it matches this imperfect humanity of ours a little bit more? And I see that in the coming generations who are choosing not to accept the way things are and not partake in a lot of the way things are, and choosing to say, this is what I believe is more useful, or this is what I want for myself. And the more people do that, the more that we have a lot of people doing that, things will change. They have to, because we need people to do all of the jobs and all of the things in our society. It doesn't run without us. So if we can stand together and say, like, these things need to change, and part of that is personal choice, which can be really hard when you have your own expectations, you have your family, and you need to make a certain amount to, like, care for them. And at the same time, like, I'm not going to accept that I have to work 7 days a week. I'm not going to do that. Or, you know, things like that. I'm not going to take a job where I can only get 2 weeks off a year. Just those, a lot of those personal choices, I think, really add up to bring more acceptance and more change.
One of the things you said there that I think is really interesting is the idea that everyone's doing the best that they can. And what's really unique about the best that we can is that it's very limited by our perspective. And also, like, this is one of the big reasons to go to therapy, is that so often we're held back by these ideas that we hold that feel like they're fact, they're set in stone. Like, I can't eat the last cookie. That's against the rules. That's against my code of conduct. And part of the beauty of going to therapy, part of the beauty of having conversation with people, even if it's not in therapy, is having a chance to have some of those things challenged. Like, having a chance to have somebody ask you the question, oh, like, how come it's so important to make everybody else happy? How come you're feeling this pressure to not speak up about your own needs? Like, where does that come from? And actually working through the root of that. Because often, again, we're doing the best we can with what we know. But that doesn't mean there aren't things that we might be able to learn that wouldn't make a huge difference in, like, the quote unquote best that we can do.
Yeah.
Like, one of the parts that I love about this whole conversation around, like, perfection versus being human and messy is that so often we create this pressure, and we're all doing it. Like, we're all out here, like, trying to live up to some, like, conceptual standard that kind of exists. Like, we kind of exist because we do see the reality of stuff and reputation and, like, title. We see all that. That's real. But the need to measure up to something, more specifically, the need to measure up to things that often we don't even care about, we don't even want to, when it gets down to it, is it's almost humorous how pervasive it is, and how valuable and humbling and connecting it is when we're actually able to be like, hey, I am just as human and messy as you. That thing that you struggle with, I struggle with that too. The thing that's hard for you, yeah, that's hard for me too.
I think of this too, as you say that, with a lot of parents. And I could imagine, again, and I think it, not just parents, I think it's a lot of us, but this just came to mind, of being on that pedestal. And it feels kind of nice when your kids see you a certain way. And maybe I know, like, how I look at my parents, or how I have looked at them growing up, and then there seemed to be a point where I could see them as just human, and messy and imperfect, and just, they were kids once, and still have that kid that experienced whatever they experienced within them. And there is just a level of, like, in some ways it feels nice to even have someone on a pedestal that, like, takes some of the responsibility away. And I think there's a certain level of that is almost needed in some. That's part of, like, a leadership role as a parent, like, not telling your child everything that's going on, like, because they maybe don't have the emotional capacity to regulate that. But then at the same time, like being able to let them in on when they're struggling and they see you as perfect, letting them in on the places where you're not. Or as a leader, being able to come back to saying, you know, I want feedback. Like I need feedback from how this is going or what this looks like or what matters. Are we still on track? Or, you know, I struggle with these things too, and that's part of it. So it's kind of where is it useful and where is it detrimental? Same with social media. I think that that question shows up for me all the time, and I love to use it as a filter for my thoughts. Um, I'm like, how is this thought useful? And even some of the judgmental thoughts that show up, I'm like, how is that one useful? Like, is that something that really matters to me that I really want to embody more that I'm not embodying? And so it's like a metering or testing for myself, like a self-reflection. Yeah, or like, is it just an ego thing? Do I just want to feel like I know what I'm doing? So part of it, I think, takes self-honesty, but also self-reflection, and that could be a useful filter for you too, maybe.
No,
I don't know. That helps me.
I think the thing I hear in that is that there's the need for stability and consistency. Because that's how we feel secure, is when it's like, okay, I know that there's something to rely on here. Like I think particularly with parents and little kids, that's hugely important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this also brings in the idea of self-regulation, because I think right now self-regulation has been talked about a lot with this, and it's this idea that no matter what you feel, no matter what comes up, you should be able to handle it and stay calm. Like that's the idea of how it gets talked about.
Yeah.
And that's not right. That's not exactly what it is. Self-regulation means sometimes we're above the line, sometimes we're below the line, but we can come back to the line.
Mm-hmm.
And as a parent, I think that's one of the most important things to teach your kids, is that I can be really upset, I can be really hurt, I can be really angry. And what does it look like to work through that?
Mm-hmm.
How do I handle that without breaking things, smashing things, going off the deep end? Like, how do I bring it back to the line?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of, like, within leadership, within all of these things, being able to show up in a way that people are like, yes, I know that I can consistently rely on you, and I know that you're human. I know that my experience is not unrelatable to you.
And I think it's about the how. It's about returning, and it's about how we do that. Instead of what happens, it's like, how do we want to navigate? We can't choose what happens a lot of the time. So much that's out of our control. But we can learn too how to navigate what happens in a way that is meaningful to us. And I feel like that's where a lot of the power that we have is choosing how we navigate our imperfection. And that's where therapy can be really helpful in like opening up, like you say, challenging maybe some of the ways we've done that, some of the ways we're thinking, and then also opening a door to like new possibilities. What are other ways I could do that? What does that sound like or look like or feel like?
One of the things I would kind of say from this whole conversation is that there's not exactly a right way to do it. I might argue there's a wrong way to do it. Like, the wrong way would be to maybe pretend to be perfect all the time and to actually believe that you're on the pedestal and to believe that everyone else should be there too. Like, I'd maybe argue that's the wrong way. But in terms of how to actually do it, in terms of how to be a human and be messy and imperfect, be a therapist and be a professional and yet still be human and messy and imperfect, it's going to depend on the person and the situation, in the context of whatever relationship you're in right now, in what's necessary in that moment. I love that nuance. Like, I love the gray. I'm all about the, like, let's take this case by case.
Yeah, I used to hate it, and sometimes I still do. Again, I think that's very human of us to like the black and white. It makes it a little bit more efficient, easy in the mind. Like, we use less energy thinking about it. But then at the same time, there is a lot of beauty to the gray and to the context and to that. And when we do slow down, as my supervisor recently said, I was like, there's no right way. And he said, I think there's many right ways. And I like that more. That's a quote in my office right now. Because there are many right ways to do it. And as the way I do it may not work for you or anyone else, or it may work for some other people. Some parts of it might. And it's about figuring that out, what works for you, which takes some effort and some intention. And for me, I think I would say it's paid off a lot. And it's really valuable to me in the way that I get to experience the world. Oh, yeah. A little more grace and compassion and softness.
Those are all things that it's always worth making more space for. Not just here in the space for it, but everywhere.
Everywhere is the space for it.
It is.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, wrapping this up today. From this conversation, is there anything that you'll do different in how you try and represent yourself?
Ooh. What's most salient for me is the reminder to return, to continue to practice. And I love this analogy that someone, I don't know who told me this, but it was like, if you forgot to brush your teeth one day, would you just give up and never brush your teeth again? And I was like, of course not. That is so dumb. I would just, like, they would get fuzzy. It would be gross. So I would just brush them when I remembered. And I think that's the same thing here. It's like when you remember or realize that you've strayed, similar to mindfulness of bringing your attention back, just return. And I think it's more about how many times we return than how many times we've strayed. So for me I'm going to return to some of my maybe loving kindness practices or compassion practices. And yeah, that's my...
I love that.
What about you?
One of the things that I liked was that idea of thinking about our capability not as how I represented it as like, well, this is the line that I've hit and realized I will either fail or accept, but instead looking at it as, this is me. How do I accept myself in a way that's loving and caring and kind? And how do I practice that? Practice was another like big word that I heard a lot.
Yeah.
That like all of this kind of comes together in how do we practice showing up, being ourselves, accepting who that is, being loving, gracious, caring. And like you said there, it's not about how many times I fail. It's about how many times I keep going back and doing it again. So I think holding all of that, obviously, like it's hard to do. And none of us are perfect at it, since after all, we're all human. But it's a great thing to strive for.
So. Yeah. I like to say perfectly imperfect. Yep. So I hope that some or any piece of that was useful or interesting or valuable to our listeners. And I invite you to only take what is useful, valuable, or interesting from these and just leave the rest. If anything, try it out. And if it doesn't work for you, don't do it. If it does, explore it more or keep going. But yeah.
We'd love to hear from any of you in the comments. Feel free to give this a like, give us a follow. If you have questions, comments, anything else you want to add. I said comments multiple times there, but maybe that's just a testament to how much I'd love to see them or read them. But yeah, thank you for being here. And until next time, have a lovely whatever time of day it is.
Yes.